Now fast forward on to 2008, the spring. Bear Stearns goes down. Now we get up to September. Lehman Brothers now goes down. And suddenly we started to see the entire financial structure of this country start to go into a death spiral. The Republican Secretary of the Treasury, you remember that photograph, even got on his knees begging the Congress for special authority to start an emergency rescue plan called TARP, Troubled Assets Relief Program. And that caused additional spending. It, by the way, kept us from going into financial cardiac arrest. It saved a lot of the big Wall Street banks, much to everyone in this room's agitation when we saw the banks then still giving out huge bonuses to the executives. But it saved the financial structure of this country. But it cost money. By the way, that TARP program has paid back almost all of the money. Then the transition and the cooperation between a Republican administration and a new Democratic administration, and the handoff of that, and then trying to stimulate what is now a very sour economy that is really in the doldrums with a stimulus bill, and that costs money. You know where a good part of that stimulus money came? Over my objection, by the way, because I wanted more of it to go into infrastructure, into roads and bridges. And every $1 billion spent in roads and bridges in construction produces something like 50 to 75,000 new jobs. But it was limited in the infrastructure spending. Most of that spending went back to the states. The states were in financial distress. In Florida alone, $4.5 billion came into Florida to prop up the Medicaid program, which is a federal-state shared program for the poor and the disabled for health care. Another $2.2 billion in that stimulus bill came into Florida to save 26,000 teachers' jobs. And by the way, that money bypassed the State Department of Education and went straight to the school districts. But that stimulus money was only good for 2 years. And you are seeing now the results, not just in Florida, it's in a lot of the states where there are these significant cutbacks. You add up all of those things and throw in some considerable partisan politics and ideological rigidity, and you get us to where we are now. And how do we get out of it? Well, I want to bring an optimistic message to you. It's too bad that I have to bring this optimistic message after the display that we went through to avoid this nation going into default where it couldn't pay its bills, and where it took us up to the 59th minute of the 11th hour in order to hammer together a package that we could get the votes. Once it was hammered together, then you saw the votes. It was overwhelming in the House. It was 76 out of 100 votes in the Senate. But it was just a first step. A first $1 trillion of cuts, and then under law, set up a process by which a super committee of 6 from the House and 6 from the Senate will come together, have to report by Thanksgiving for at least $1.5 trillion more of deficit reduction, with the very bare minimum of $1.2 billion in deficit reduction. But everything can be on the table for this super committee. Here's my optimistic message. This is a moment in time that we can do serious tax reform. Now, there can't be anybody here that is happy about this tax code. It's the most convoluted, most complex kind of thing. But here's what it does. This is going to shock you. There is more money being given out through special tax preferences, read loopholes. More money each year going out to those loopholes than is coming in from the American taxpayer in income tax. That's a shocking statistic. It's a fact. Over the next 10 years, those tax preferences are worth $14 trillion over 10 years. That's tax revenue that's not coming in to the federal government. There's some of those tax preferences that certainly have a desirable outcome. Deduction of mortgage interest. That was originally put in because owning a home is a desirable goal. Charitable contributions, same thing. But there are a lot of tax preferences that were given to a special interest as this tax code became a piggy bank for people, their special interest to take out of the Treasury. I'll give you one. I'm not picking on the oil industry, although you know that I stand up to them when they try to drill right off the coast of Florida and mess up our United States military testing and training area, which is the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida. But an example is way back, oil companies were given a special tax break as an encouragement for them to drill. They don't need that now. Did you notice what the last 3 months' quarterly profit was for each of the major oil companies? Around $5 billion for 3 months, 90 days. So there are a lot of those kinds of preferences that you could just take a little bit of that $14 trillion, 10, 15%, pour that money over into the tax code, and what you could do is lower everybody's tax rate, and you could simplify the whole system into 3 tax brackets, and you could lower the corporate rate with just 10 or 15%. And you know what that does, and why I think this is a moment in time. There are those who have signed Grover Norquist's pledge. As a matter of fact, I think every Republican senator has signed the pledge. But you can actually do this without them violating their pledge that they're voting for new tax increases, because the elimination of those tax breaks, pouring it into the tax code and lowering everybody's rates, you know what that does that the actuaries tell us? It causes the engine of the economy to start cranking up because of less efficient breaks getting out of the tax code and a simplified tax code, and it produces, the actuaries say, $1 trillion in new revenue over the next decade. That's a win, win, win for everybody. I've written a number of op-ed pieces on just exactly what I've shared with you. And it's my hope that this super committee will realize, given the fact that they realize that they're going to have to get agreement on something, because at the end of the day, the incentive is a severe cut in spending programs and a severe cut in defense programs. And to avoid that, the super committee has to come together by December. Under the new law, the package will go back to each house up or down vote, no amendments. That's why I'm optimistic. This is a moment we don't want to waste. You can imagine if we tried to do a major tax code reform coming to our committee, the Finance Committee, how you would get pecked to death with the special interest saying, I want my interest. This is a moment in time that we should not miss. I think the news this morning that over 100 CEOs have said, a pox on all of you, we're not contributing anything to the political campaigns until you all start showing some bipartisanship. I think that's a good message. I think the wake-up calls that we've gotten, which has been so deplorable on loss of jobs and not being able to produce the new jobs, you start cranking up the economy and start adding in some other things, such as infrastructure, building some roads and bridges. I'll just say parenthetically, I wish that it were going to be high-speed rail from Orlando to Tampa to Orlando to West Palm to Miami. And we would have been the showcase of the whole country because we would have had it running at no cost to the state of Florida by 2015. But other infrastructure spending is going to have to be done, and then you can do some other things in the interim to try to stimulate the economy. A reduction of some of the FICA tax on an interim basis where people will have more money in their pockets. You could even go in and do where an employer has had a loss of business, that employer would be able to employ the unemployed at no cost to them on a trial basis. There's a program that has been done for the last several years in the state of Georgia that has been very similar. These kind of new creative ideas we ought to do. Well, thank you for having me to come and share these thoughts with you. If I were not an optimist, it'd be hard to continue on. I really am. I think this is an opportunity. And I hope that you all, if you feel as strongly as you hear being expressed by these CEOs, that they're tired of this bickering, they're tired of the partisanship, they're tired of the rigidity, I would hope that you'll speak out as well. You have given me the privilege of public service. This is an exceptional time. I was raised to believe that one of the highest callings that a person could have is public service. You have honored me with that, and I thank you for letting me bring you this report today.